We are recording. So, wanted to talk a little bit about the lecture quiz next week, lecture quiz 3. And I'm going to propose that that be over the skeletal system chapter 7 in the book. Since we will certainly be through that by Wednesday, I would think, the majority of it, whatever we're not. Well, let's see. Maybe we should just specify what sections that is going to cover, because we have half the week listed there as skeletal system and then half the week joints. So why don't we have it cover no, it's a fairly short chapter. Have you guys gotten into chapter 7 already? Yes? Sadie's saying yes.
I have a little bit.
Okay. Well, let's have the quiz go up to section 7.3 in the book. Which is entitled Bone Function. So the quiz will cover the anatomy, the types of ossification, and factors that affect bone growth, development, and repair, which is quite a few topics.
So from the beginning to 7.3?
Yeah. Well, it won't be the entire chapter, but it'll be 3/4 of it probably. So we can talk about integumentary, we can talk about skeletal, whatever, or lab stuff as well. Anything you'd like to ask about that you've been studying for lecture stuff?
So the lab quiz is on 15, 16, 17, which is basically the end of chapter 7. So should we just do the whole chapter basically to study it?
Well, when you say end of chapter 7, you're saying it's just covering the anatomy. Is that what you're getting at?
Mhm.
Right. If you're looking at the bones, it's basically from vertebral column 227, page 227, through the end of the chapter. Yeah. Keeping in mind that, again, the sheets that I was referring to today in lab, which lists all the structures, those are the things you need to be able to identify, not everything, in the last half of the chapter. You know what I mean? But that's where the diagrams are, yes. One thing you could do, of course, is take the terms off that sheet or those sheets that we've been using in lab and highlight the appropriate structures in the diagrams, whether that's in the textbook or in the lab book, is kind of up to you. But that might give you an immediate sense of what structures to hone in on and learn. Again, maybe you're already doing that. Because when you look at, the diagram of the femur or of the tibia or whatever it might be, you might not need to know all of those terms listed. Cross out those you don't, highlight those you do, that kind of thing. And I think it's probably, worth spending some time at home looking at the diagrams, let's say, of the bones we did today in lab. You've seen them sort of one time, but it was kind of quickly. We moved through the list. I won't say fast, but it probably seemed fast. But between now and let's say next Monday, you could really spend some time in the textbook or the lab book, getting comfortable with structure. So if you heard olecranon process, you'd immediately relate that to the ulna and not the femur or the humerus or the scapula or something like that. So that when you got maybe into class, if you can come before the quiz and reviewed the actual bones, it's going to just make that a lot more easy. That's just an idea, thought. Are there any questions on the integumentary system? Maybe we should start there. That was last week's chapter. Everybody good with integumentary system? All right. Bone
Somebody just asked if the lecture quiz will be chapter 5 to chapter 7.3.
Oh, no. We're going to just have the lecture quiz on section 7.1 and 7.2. Because I think to have you, worry about all, basically 2.5 chapters, that's way too much to study for a quiz.
I'm confused. So when you say 7.1, 7.2, like, because I'm looking at the clinical applications and going by that.
Okay, look on page 201 of your textbook.
Okay.
And do you see where it says 7.1 bone shape and structure?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And then flip to page 203. And it says 7.2 bone development and growth.
Yep.
Okay. And then go to page 210. 7.3 bone function.
Hold on.
210.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, so what we're saying for the lecture quiz next Wednesday, you need to be familiar with basically pages 201 through 209. That's sections 7.1 and 7.2.
Okay.
So each chapter is probably broken down into, I don't know how many sections, but anywhere from, I don't know. Chapter 7 here has 11 sections. 11 sections. Chapter 4 might have 10. I mean, so that's what I mean by section numbers. So yeah, Maeve is asking, will the lecture quiz be over 5, 6, and up to 7.3? Well, that's, as I said, a lot of material. So I'm trying to restrict it down to a more manageable amount. Now, 2 weeks from today, is looking at the syllabus, is our second lecture exam, which we'll talk more about next week, but it's always kind of nice to peruse ahead and see what's coming up. Not that you're looking forward to an exam, I certainly understand that, but just good to be aware kind of, what's going on. So, my mantra. My mantra. This should be on your license plate. Review, review, review. I had some students, it was like maybe my 4th year I was teaching. They were nursing students. They had me for E&P. They bought me a t-shirt and they had written on the front, "There is life after bio with me." And I had that, just threw that out like a couple of years ago. Had that forever. So there is life after bio with Rabbit. There is. You just gotta get through it.
Yeah, my friend took it with you last semester, Tyler Noga. He said
yeah.
he talked about you very highly. So
Tyler was a great student. He's kind of he's reserved, quiet, but he was a good student.
yeah, because I was asking him yesterday about like how he studied for like the skull. So he was like helping me out with that.
Yeah. Priya, are you talking? Because I don't hear you.
My husband's taking care of my grandson, and you know how that is. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. I didn't know if you were trying to say something you wanted us to hear or not.
No, sorry.
Oh, no,
Sorry
okay.
to be distracting. All right,
Oh,
thanks.
no, that's fine. Okay, so any questions, things that you want to review? This is the time to ask.
I think, I'm glad you broke this down into sections, because I think I was talking with some of my other classmates today, and I think like a common theme I feel like I have, and what other people are saying, that everyone scares you about taking A&P. And so we're all studying all of the like really, intricate parts, and then we end up missing like the more obvious questions on the quizzes, because like we're so scared of A&P and these things we don't know, that then like when you ask like, what the frontal bone is, then we get that one wrong because we were so worried about all these processes and stuff. Like,
Yeah. Well, you know what, Paige, I'm always in a dilemma when I go to write these quizzes, because I want to not ask the most difficult questions there are, because that doesn't serve anybody any good. The student doesn't do well. They're depressed because they got a 4 on the quiz. And that I'm not out to make that happen. I'm not. But I'm not out to ask always the easiest ones. But once in a blue moon, I feel like I'm just going to give you some gimmies. But you bring up a really good point, and that is there is so much that we go over, like the bones today and all those processes. I mean, there was a lot of stuff. I mean, gosh, we were talking for 2 hours solid, and I can't ask you every single structure. I can just kind of pick a couple here and a couple there, and you don't know what those are going to be. But I try to throw, some easier questions on, and then a couple that are a little more challenging. But I think by now, since we're into like the 6th week of classes now, so if you think of like where you were on January 27th and where you are now, on March 10th, you have a better sense of the course. You have a better sense of me than I of you. You have a better sense of the pace of the course. You have a better sense of kind of how the PowerPoint lectures go and all that sort of, mechanics. And, getting back to my sign that I was pointing out a minute ago, reviewing constantly is really the key for this particular course. Just not letting up, just always trying to get a little bit of review in every couple days or every day if you have time, because then it becomes a little more manageable. A&P has a reputation for being a difficult course. I'm sure have a reputation for being a difficult person. I guess I have to admit that. But I think, and I'm believe me, I'm not trying to be conceited or bragging or anything when I say this, but when I hear comments like Sadie made of Tyler, I think that, if you take A&P with me, you're going to be successful when you get into nursing or occupational therapy or PA or whatever you decide you want to do.
Exactly.
Because for me to be easy is not doing you any benefit in the long run. Me being a pain and being super tough isn't a benefit to you either. So I walk this tightrope wanting to have a good course, a challenging course. And it's not easy. You've got to put time into it to do well. And you just have to do that. But back to your comment, did you get frontal bone wrong, really?
No, I didn't. I was just trying to think of like a relevant
Yeah, I
example.
know.
So I'm just saying, like, I think, we really enjoy it when you give us like, hey, like, this is something you should know, or, or whatever. And then like, that helps us like study more. So that was nice about the, like, 7.1 and 2, like, okay, so now we know we need to go right in there instead of just like all of chapter 7 or whatever.
Oh, well, please ask. I mean, I had intended to talk about what was going to be on that quiz because we haven't talked about it yet. And because we're doing the course, a little differently than we would ordinarily do, like we're having the lecture quizzes and exams in lab, it has made for a little more challenging organizational scheduling thing. So it could be a couple of weeks between quizzes like it has been. If we were in class, face-to-face, normal, non-COVID kind of thing, we'd probably have a quiz every week and you would know, okay, I got to study between this section and this section because that's what we did since the preceding quiz. So it would be just a little bit easier to know, but hey, if you're not sure, ask, right? Yeah. And as I said, I could say, yeah, quiz 3 over chapters 5, 6, and 2 sections to 7. Well, that's just too much. That's not fair for you to say that. So I would rather assume you put the due diligence of review for 5 and 6. And obviously you're going to spend a lot of attention on 7.1 and 7.2 for next Wednesday's quiz. Yeah.
Do you think the fall, A&P2 will be in person, like completely?
Yeah, I that's what I'm thinking. I really feel, given what I've been seeing on the news and seeing locally and statewide, that our numbers are going to be sufficient to be able to do that. Yeah. I mean, I can't guarantee it, obviously, but unless there is a significant shift in the epidemic, which I don't think there's going to be, I think we're going to be back. That's the hopes. Everybody here is planning face to face.
My friend, she goes to the Jamestown campus and she's doing A&P like completely online, and she's not doing the hot, and she's like crying like almost every day. It's like I've been trying to help her out with that, and I honestly like give her like my Blackboard information to like log in to watch your videos. Sure. Because she said like you describe it way better than like her professor's videos. So I like recommended you to her, and she's been doing a little bit better.
Oh, good. It's hard. I know it's hard for you guys to do this stuff remotely. I would hate to do it remotely too. If I was
so impersonal. But for my other class, the inquiry class that I took is called Emotional Intelligence. And I thought, oh, I know what that is, and as we got into it, it just showed me like how negatively I was talking to myself and like the order in which I'm getting things done or not. And the guy that puts on this podcast, he actually studies how our brains learn in his free time from being a doctor. And he said like testing yourself, like doing a little quiz before you go over the material and then again after, is more effective than reading like 5 or 6 times over and over again. And I kind of started to think about it, and I was like, as for me to like go over something I didn't know, you're reading it, you're doing all these things, but I'm never actually requiring an answer out of my mouth without seeing it A, B, C, or D. So I feel like since I started doing that, which hasn't been that long because I just watched it, it is like I'm retaining so much more. Just literally taking a look, and in the anatomy and physiology on the bottom left hand, that you actually have quizzes up to go with each one of those. And like, I seriously, it has helped me. The second time I'm getting like really, 80s and 90s without even opening the book, just because I'm studying, doing that way. I just thought I'd tell you.
Well, you should open the book.
Well, no, I just meant like to get what I was getting.
Yeah.
That's all. Believe me, I read the book. I read every single chapter up to where we are. Okay. Sorry.
No, that's all right. So no questions on integumentary system, no questions on skeletal. Everybody's is good with somebody say something?
If you wanted, can you go over like the intramembranous bones and like the endochondral bones?
Okay, sure. So what Sadie is talking about are the two mechanisms by which bone is laid down in the body. So let me pull up the PowerPoint as I always do. So one thing that I'll mention right off the top here is if you look in the course shell in the content section and then go to PowerPoints by chapter, you will see these two videos, one which goes over intramembranous and the other endochondral. So while we could certainly watch those now, if you would like to do that, they are there, and you probably should definitely check them out. Another thing that just popped into my head as I'm waiting for the PowerPoint to load here is Khan Academy. You've all probably heard of Khan Academy. It is an award-winning free site, right, that covers all sorts of topics, a lot of science stuff. And I am sure there is an intramembranous and endochondral ossification tutorial lesson, whatever you want to call it, that might be worth watching there too. I should probably just go there and cut and paste it into the course shell somewhere. Because these two topics, or methods of ossification, often cause students to stumble a little bit, because it's so, all this happens at the cellular level, so it's difficult to kind of conceptualize sometimes. This is a really, really big PowerPoint file, so it's just taking a little bit of time to load. And the reason for that is because I have all of the bone diagrams left in this PowerPoint. As you can see, if you go all the way down, there's 220 slides. It's huge. We don't, of course, cover all those, but that's why, if you're wondering why it takes so long to load, that's probably why. Okay, so if we go to this slide number 26, everybody see the fetal skull, or fetal skeleton rather? No? Okay. Let me reshare again. I don't know why I have to do this. All right. How about now? Okay, see the fetal skeleton. All right. So this particular slide is kind of interesting. It is a cast of a fetus at 12 weeks of development. So we're talking 3 months, right? And you can, of course, see many of the same skeletal, well, I shouldn't say skeletal because it's not quite bone yet. You can see many of the same structures, if you will, from a structural point of view as we have in ourselves, right? The developing cranial bones and, of course, the mandible, and you can see the phalanges and metacarpals forming and ulnar radius and all that stuff. But these structures are not fully ossified structures. And that's kind of what this process, these two processes get at. And that is, how do our present day bones become bone? And so when we talk about intramembranous ossification, we're talking about these sorts of structures giving rise eventually to mature, bones in an adult. So the skull bones, where clavicles and sternum and maxillae and mandible and zygomatic bones are. So these are examples of bones laid down in this process called intramembranous ossification. Endochondral ossification would include development of all the rest of the bones of the body, all of the long bones, for example, the ribs, the vertebrae, the coxal bones, the metatarsals, tarsals, phalanges. Okay, so the next few slides talk about some steps that occur as intramembranous ossification takes place. And the key to understanding what goes on here is the fact that you have in the fetus what is referred to as mesenchymal tissue. Now, what that word kind of means is this is a type of embryonic tissue. You have to take embryology to really get into this, and I'm not going to go into embryology because that's a complicated topic. What does vascularized mean? Anybody know?
It's blood going to it.
Right, it's got a lot of blood vessels, capillaries. It's got a rich blood supply. And I've underlined the word sheets. So you got to envision, say, the future frontal bone or the future mandible in the embryonic state is made up of these layers, these sheet-like layers of very rich blood supply of mesenchymal tissue, layers and layers of mesenchymal tissue. At some point in time, clusters of these layered sheet-like mesenchymal tissues, these cells differentiate. You know what that means, differentiate? Just a fancy name for what? Anybody know? Differentiate. It basically means they change into, they undergo a significant structural change and they develop into, in this case, osteoblasts. Now, does anybody know what osteoblasts do? You know what osteocytes are?
I get
Bone cells.
blast the osteos or something like that. I can't remember how I remembered what is it.
Well, if you watch my Zoom lecture, I told you what to think of when you look at this letter,
Yeah.
B. B. What's B?
What? Bone.
Build.
Build.
Right. Build. These are bone building cells. Right. That makes sense because what's the goal here? Here's the goal.
Ossification or
Yeah,
hardening?
no, not the ossification simply means to make bone.
Oh, okay.
Make bone, ossify, make bone. So one would think that if you want to make a house, you better have a builder. You know, it's as simple as that. If you want to build bone, you need osteoblasts. So those osteoblasts differentiate from what we call mesenchymal embryonic tissue. And those osteoblasts, what they do, in an effort to build bone, to make bone, is they secrete compounds that result in the formation of matrix. Now, you might have heard the term matrix. It is this region that we find in connective tissues outside of the cells. And so these osteoblasts are producing this matrix material. And eventually that matrix material becomes calcified. And that kind of makes sense because, you know, what did your mom tell you when you were a kid? Drink milk because why?
Strengthen your bones.
Yeah, build strong bones. Didn't we all hear that as kids? Or maybe it's a commercial, I don't know. But yeah, I associate milk with strong bones. Probably the U.S. Dairy Consortium put that out and tried to advertise it to increase milk sales, but that's okay. Because our milk is loaded with calcium, and what these cells are doing, these osteoblasts are laying down this matrix, and then soon afterwards, we talk about this calcification process taking place, whereby the matrix takes on calcium and it becomes hardened, becomes a structural framework here. And this process occurs when these cells are differentiating into osteoblasts, and eventually then matrix is laid down in regions of that mesenchymal tissue that are referred to as primary ossification centers. So this gets at the idea that ossification starts at a particular zone, if you will, within those layered sheets, and spreading out from that, bone is laid down. And when those osteoblasts that have produced the matrix that becomes calcified, when they find themselves surrounded by matrix, those osteoblasts now are called osteocytes. So an osteocyte, again, is a bone cell. It lives in a hollow cavity called a what?
Lacunae.
A lacuna. Yeah, one lacunae plural. And you all know what we're talking about here. Osteocytes sit in lacunae within the matrix. And so imagine this layered mesenchymal tissue, certain areas starting to see this differentiation into osteoblasts, this calcification, ossification process beginning to emanate out from different zones. And pretty soon you're starting to develop some pretty significant bony deposits to the point where they all eventually fuse. And what once was this embryonic connective tissue, mesenchymal tissue, now is recognizable as bone. And if you think back to, for example, a skull bone in you and I, if we look at a cross section, what do we have on the very outside and inside of the skull bone? What kind of bone? Compact or spongy?
Compact on the outside, like spongy in the middle, and then back to compact.
Right. On the very outside and inside parts of a skull bone is compact bone, and in the center, sandwiched in between, is spongy. So all that is laid down via this intramembranous ossification process. And so there's the exact diagram, a photograph rather, that I was envisioning as I was asking that question. So again, compact on the outside, compact on the inside. Here's your brain up here, And then here's spongy in the very center. So we often associate intramembranous ossification with more flat bones. When we talk about most of the other bones, like 90% of the bones in your body are produced via endochondral ossification. This is different in that you don't start off with mesenchymal embryonic tissue like you had with intramembranous, but you start off with hyaline cartilage. And that is what gets replaced by bone. So it's not a differentiation or change into bone like we had a minute ago. Here we're talking about basically the destruction of the cartilage and the invasion of osteoblasts and the laying down of bone. So here we see at the bottom of this first slide a elongated piece of hyaline cartilage. Now that's eventually going to become perhaps the femur or the humerus or the tibia. Think of the long bones, for example. Well, in that future femur, we see some changes beginning to happen. Notice what begins to happen here in the center of the future bone, but it's still cartilage, okay? What is this? What this is depicting are chondrocytes, which you know are cartilage cells. They start to enlarge, they get bigger. And we begin to see the formation of matrix around the lacunae. So you can kind of see this lighter yellow, I don't know what color that is, pale yellow. That's the matrix that's being laid down amid the chondrocytes, amid the lacunae. Now remember we talked in the previous intramembranous ossification how calcification started to happen as well between the mesenchymal tissue. Well, we have that happen here too. So not only do the chondrocytes enlarge in size, we start seeing matrix form between the lacunae, and we also begin to see calcification taking place. And as it indicates here on number 1, this calcification interrupts the nutrient flow to the cartilage cells. Now, what if I cut off your nutrient flow? You can't eat any more food for the rest of the year. You know what's going to happen. You're going to die. Well, same thing happens to these chondrocytes. They die. They eventually die. Now, this second step is just showing the formation of a periosteum around the periphery of the future bone. Remember, this is that tough fibrous covering that we know is on the surface of bones. You've all remember hearing about the periosteum, I hope. It's on long bone structure, page 202. Yeah. So the periosteum is basically what's on the surface of the bone except for the epiphyses. So that starts getting laid down, and we can see a little bit of compact being laid down here as this narrow white strip just inside. Okay, so back to the idea of cutting off the nutrient supply to the chondrocytes. So those cartilage cells are eventually going to die. And then what we see happen is osteoblasts begin to invade those areas that were occupied by cartilage cells, which are now dead. And the osteoblasts, you know what they do. They do what? Build. They build bone. And the first thing that they're going to lay down here initially is spongy bone, where there was cartilage. Eventually, other osteoblasts are going to lay down compact bone on the outside. So spongy bone's laid down first, then there's compact bone laid down just inside the developing periosteum. And then we have a third kind of bone cell here called the osteoclasts. Does anybody know what osteoclasts do? Osteoblasts build bone. Osteocytes are just bone cells. What do osteoclasts do?
Don't they create a space for the new bone cells?
Well, they do create a space, not so much for the bone cells, but in this particular case, the osteoclasts, I use the analogy or the metaphor in my Zoom lecture. I say, think of C as standing for cleave or cut. You know what a cleaver is, right? Meat cleaver? Yeah. So these osteoclasts are going to cleave, cut, dissolve, remove some of the bone that might have been laid down initially. So for example, you know in the future femur, what's going to be in the center of the diaphysis here? Well, there's going to be blood vessels, yeah. But what kind of marrow? Do you remember what kind of marrow is going to be coming in here?
Yellow.
Yellow bone marrow, right. So you have to have a medullary cavity, don't you, to put that yellow marrow in, as well as to put larger blood vessels in. So the osteoclasts are going to create this medullary cavity by cleaving or cutting, dissolving some of this bone and making the medullary cavity. So that's an important step that occurs. Notice here in the center of this future femur, in the diaphysis region, is this primary ossification center. This is getting at the heart of what's going on. That is the enlargement of the cartilage dying, and the laying down of new bone. This occurs initially in the diaphysis of the future long bone. So primary ossification center starts in the diaphysis. Now look what's starting to happen here in the epiphysis regions. Can you tell what this is showing? You know what this is here? Or what this is here, or what this is here? You might say, oh, that's bone getting laid down. And I used to think that when I first looked at that, but then I thought, no, that's not bone. Do you know what's going on here? Well, if I go back a slide, what's going on here? That same process is taking place here and here. This is the enlargement of the chondrocytes. This is the eventual calcification of the matrix, death of the chondrocytes, and invasion of osteoblasts to start laying down bone. That same process begins now in the epiphysis regions. And we form what are referred to as secondary ossification centers. Okay, you know what the primary ossification center was here, right? Now we're going to develop them in the epiphyses, and that's happened right here. Here we've got the replacement of the cartilage with bone tissue. Spongy bone comes in, lays down matrix. And eventually, the hyaline cartilage that was present there from the very beginning, you're left with just a little piece of it. They're called epiphyseal growth plates. So here's some cartilage, here's hyaline cartilage. What's all this other stuff? What's this? What's this? What's all this? What's this? Answer is what?
Is it spongy bone?
There's spongy bone here, yep. And there could be compact along the very outer edge, right? Yeah, there's both. We'll just call it bone, right? This is bone, this is bone, this is bone. Both compact and spongy. And of course, all of this is bone. So as long as you have pieces of hyaline cartilage in the form of epiphyseal plates, this bone can still do what? Second sentence tells you. It can still grow. It can still elongate. right? Now, will a time come when that cartilage is no longer there? The answer is yes. Here we are. Here we have remnants of the growth plates or epiphyseal plates. This is indicating that both ossification centers have now kind of met, and there's full ossification of the entire bone. We're done lengthening. That bone is not going to get any longer because the cartilage is no longer there. So when you look, for example, at an X-ray, like we are here, here we can see the epiphyseal plates in this X-ray as this dark black line. This tells me that this individual is an adolescent, still growing because of the intact growth plates. Now, by the way, see this big gap here? Do you know what this is? From this morning, you should be able to tell me. What's in here?
Your meniscus.
Right, the menisci are there. Yep, the fiber cartilage. Remember how I said the condyles of the femur and the tibia don't contact one another, otherwise you'd have a lot of pain? Yeah, so that gap just is indicating some normal menisci, you know, width. That should be there. Yeah, and again, we're not looking at that, but I thought I'd just point that out. By the way, what's this right here?
Fibula.
Right. Okay. So this is an interesting timetable that kind of tells us, well, when do the secondary ossification centers appear in the epiphyses of future long bones? Well, it says here between the time you're born to the time you're 5 years old. And then between 5 and 12 for females, a little bit later in males, ossification spreads rapidly to the point by the time you're 18 or 20, a lot of your upper limb bones, humerus, ulna, radius, scapulae, completely ossified. By the time you're 21 or 23, the lower limb bones, femur, fibula, tibia, all done. And by the time you're 23 and 25, sternum, clavicles, vertebrae, all fully ossified. By the way, notice that women get ossification taking place earlier than men. Why is that? Because they're smarter.
Estrogen.
Right. It's the effect of estrogen. Yep, absolutely right, Paige. Yep, it's sex hormone impact. Right. Okay, so that's in essence the difference between the two types of ossification. And I think, you know, if you watch those videos, and I've got several hyperlinks embedded within a couple of those slides, you know, hopefully that'll help. But we can talk more about this, you know, next week or whenever too. Did that help? Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you.
I haven't been monitoring the chat. Are there other? No other comments. Okay. Other topics? Everybody good with the anatomy of long bones? That's basically kind of gets back to these slides. Oops. Where is it? Hang on a minute here. long bone structure. This is the slide I was trying to pull up. Do y'all see that slide with the major parts of the long bone? Yeah, okay. I mean, there's a lot sandwiched in there. I stuck a lot of terms in there, but this is the same diagram that was in the lab exercise. Oh, I forget what number it was. I think it was 12, exercise 12. So, getting a good foundational understanding of these structures then lets you understand better the ossification processes. For example, I mean, you learned about growth plates. I mean, you know about where they are, but you don't know really what they were. Well, now you know that these are what once was a strip of cartilage, but now that cartilage is gone. I mean, if it's still cartilaginous, again, that bone can continue to grow and lengthen, but a point will come where the two ossification centers, the secondaries here in the epiphysis and the primary in the diaphysis, they meet, merge, and the cartilage then disappears completely. This photograph does label remnant. I guess if you look super close, you can see a bit of a ridge here. It's not the most clear photograph, but that's what that's pointing to. Any other questions on skin, bone, life in general?
What chapter do we end at for like A&P1?
Lymphatic system. I think it's chapter 16. So after skeletal, we do joints, which technically is part of the skeletal system, but it's a separate chapter in the book, chapter 8. And then muscular system, and then respiratory, and then we do blood chapter, and blood is really not a system, is it? It's a what? What's blood?
Tissue.
It's a connective tissue, right? But we give it a separate chapter because there's so much interesting things to learn about blood. And then cardiovascular comes after that. That's a pretty big chapter. That's probably one of the biggest chapters of the book. And then we wrap up the semester with lymphatic system. And that is a system also that is really pertinent because we're in the midst, of course, or hopefully toward the end of the COVID epidemic. And that relates directly to, the immune system, the immune response, viral infection, bacterial infection, how our body copes with those things. So it's really an interesting system to talk about in light of where we are. It's really a perfect time to talk about that.
When that woman appeared on TV, MSNBC or CNN, wherever, and she initially started talking about putting masks on, there's a virus spreading, what was your initial thought when you heard it was respiratory?
Oh, you mean a year ago now or more?
Yes. I know that freaks you out because you think about it way more intensely than we do.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, John. You know, when I first heard about this, and I have to put myself back a year, and we've been through so much in the last 12 months, it's kind of hard to put, where was I mentally last March? I remember, you know, the college was talking about, you know, we need to be able to transition in the next week or two. We're not sure what's going to happen. And so there was all that going on in my mind. How am I going to do this with my classes? But also thinking about, is this going to be as bad as they were predicting it was going to be? After hearing about what was going on in Wuhan and the outbreaks there and people that were dying, you know, we have nothing to compare this with other than the Spanish epidemic, Spanish flu epidemic at the turn of the 20th century, back, you know, 1915 or whenever it was.
Yeah.
No one has really lived, well, very few people have lived through this, you know, sort of thing. But I think, and I don't want to get political, but I guess it's hard not to get political. I think that there were lots of people at the governmental level who were very, very worried and saw what could be coming down the pike and knew what was coming down the pike. And I think not enough information was coming out to really tell us that a year later, 500,000 plus people were going to be gone. I mean, you think about that. Wiped off the face of the earth in less than a year. There were dire predictions made early on. This is going to be serious.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I was concerned more about the elderly population than I am of, you know, most of you guys, because you're younger, and you know, although younger people can die of it, it's not as lethal to you. I have never felt personally really scared, because I think if I had, I would have taught everything remote in the fall. I would have not come in. But I didn't feel uncomfortable enough doing that. And plus, I'll say this because I really truly feel it. I don't think it was fair to teach you a course like this, or especially microbiology, without the hands-on component, because I just don't think, and you know, Sadie, your friends are going through this now. You know, you're teaching these courses remotely, and how do you teach a person to work a microscope without a microscope? You can't. You could talk about the parts of the scope, you can talk about all that stuff, but I have students in my microbiology class this semester who took A&P remotely last year. They don't know an ocular lens from a light switch. Seriously, they don't know how to use the scope, and I've got to teach them how to do all that, which, you know, I have to do that because that's what I do, but I can't assume they've had that experience. And so I'm kind of not answering your question, but I was worried, I was concerned. I never thought it would be as wide, well, I knew it'd be widespread, but I didn't think it would go, I don't think it would go as fast as it has. It just shows how fast an epidemic can spread. It's amazing how fast it can spread.
When Dr. Fauci was made to shut up, that's when I knew we were in trouble. That's when I knew we were in trouble.
Yeah, I got to be careful what I say because
He's the leading epidemiologist and has been for decades.
yeah,
There's no way I'm not, you know what I mean?
You know, we have to follow the science. I just, that's how I was raised, how I was trained.
Yep.
To not follow evidence-based science is doing a disservice to the public. And people are dying unnecessarily when you put out information that is incorrect, erroneous, based on nothing but your own opinion. And if you're not a doctor or a physician or an epidemiologist, this should not be disseminated out to millions of people the way it was. So it's kind of sad. I think a lot of people died unnecessarily. This could have been handled better. Again, I'm getting a little political, I guess, in my liberal thoughts, but it just made me so mad to think about people dying when we could have just done a better job with this. It had it been handled more carefully.
If you don't die from it, it creates other problems in the respiratory and lymphatic system. It creates other problems. It makes other problems worse.
Well, yeah, sure, yeah. I got a sister who had COVID in Iowa, and she probably has some permanent heart damage. She's a very healthy person. You know, no smoking, exercises, very active. She got COVID. She didn't go into the hospital, but she was this close, and she had to have she has to have rotator cuff surgery, which got postponed because of the epidemic. But she had to have some tests done, and one of the heart MRIs that they did on her, they found some issues. So we talk about the long haulers, people who have had COVID but now are going to be suffering some of these ill effects for God knows how long in their lives. You know, some of these things may never ever go away. It's sad. It's really tragic.
Excellent.
Yeah. So hopefully come fall, you know, things are going to be a lot better. But the variants that are out there, they're a little worried about those, but I think we can handle those.
Yeah.
Through boosters, and the worst is over, I think. But you guys have lived through a very interesting time in your lives. You'll never forget this. You can tell your kids and grandkids, you know, I went to school remotely. I had to. I couldn't go to school. I had to wear masks for a year. Couldn't eat at a restaurant. Couldn't go to a concert.
You think it'll ever be like, yeah, we started wearing these masks 20 years ago. You know, I was only whatever 40 years old when we started wearing these things. What, grandma? You didn't have to wear a mask, you know? Do you think that?
I don't know.
No,
No.
no.
Just get a panic attack thinking about it.
No, this is America. We don't play around. When it's time to get down, we do it, no matter what it is.
I guess we could all move to Texas if they made us keep wearing them.
I think one of the worst things that happened was letting every state do whatever they wanted to.
Yes.
That was the worst thing you could have done.
I was so shocked. I don't know why I was so shocked, but yeah.
Yeah.
Here, honey, what do you want me to put on? There's Mickey. Sorry, guys.
All right. Well, again, we diverge. Any more A&P questions? All right, I will stick around here for another few minutes. If anybody wants to hang out, you can. Otherwise, we'll see you Tuesday in review or Wednesday in lab. Get outside and enjoy the weather. It looks so nice out.
We're going for a walk right now. Thank you so much.
Okay, guys.
Bye.
I gotta drive
Bye.
to Ellicottville.
What'd you say, John?
I have to drive to Ellicottville.
Oh,
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, I usually get a coffee, pick her up, and we ride.
Who's her?
My fiance, my shop.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll wear without her. I don't like going to too many places without her. No. Mm-mm.
Good.
So I got some other questions.
Bye, guys.
All
Bye,
right,
Freya. Get some sleep.
Yeah, that'll be, yeah. That's ours.
So all right. So I got everything that I need to know as far as the lab is concerned. So 15 to 17. In the lab book.
For the quiz next week. Yep.
But we're having a lecture part of it too as well.
We have a lecture quiz as well over section 7.1 and 7.2. Yep.
But 7.3 ain't involved?
No, up to, not including, up to. So 7.1 and 7.2.
Got it. So everything in there is fair game. And you'll probably be seeing me on campus again.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome to come.
Okay, well, let me make sure. All right, so 7.2, yep, there it is. Up to page 210. So don't worry, no more about this, all of the, like the long skeleton, not everything on the skeleton, just the long bones.
Are you talking about the lecture quiz?
Yeah,
No, there's not going to be any bone identification on the lecture quiz. Nope. Nope, it's just the stuff covered in the textbook from page 201 through
209.
209. Yep. Now there is a diagram there on long bone structure, right? I pulled that up earlier. So
Right.
there's some anatomy like, you know, epiphysis, diaphysis, yellow marrow, medullary cavity, that kind of, that's just a label of long bone structure. But there's no identification of, you know, condyles or foramen or anything like that.
So how is this test gonna be set up? I mean, so
But the
we
what,
don't have,
quiz?
we don't have to identify nothing during the quiz.
You're talking the lecture quiz.
No, I'm talking about the lab quiz.
Well, the lab quiz has tons of questions. I could put a station or 2 or 10.
Yeah,
up there,
that's
right?
identification. Okay,
Yeah, that's lab.
for lab, and then
Oh.
for lecture.
7.1 and 7.2.
So that's all going to be like questions.
Well, that's going to cover those topics described there, you know, as we said, 201 to 209 or 10 or whatever it was.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And,
go back in the PowerPoint, watch the Zoom lecture on those sections.
yeah,
Mhm.
and just follow this thing again.
For lab, that's the lab stuff.
Yeah, just go through that.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Yep.
Good.
Just like you practiced for today's quiz. Yep.
Yeah, I know I passed that. I know
Yeah.
I probably passed that.
Yep. It didn't take you long to do the quiz, I'll tell you.
No.
You were prepared. That's great.
All right, so I'm good so far. I know I'll probably meet with you before that, you know. I have to build a database today. So in my database course, we're building an EHR,
What's that?
electronic health record. Like
Oh.
we build in the database itself
Okay.
using SQL, and there's another one. I just have to download it and then create a medical record.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm not the end user. Actually, I'm setting it up for the end user. So I'm the beginner.
Huh. A lot of work, huh?
Yeah, it's insane. It takes 3 hours just to do that assignment. And then there's a midterm on top of a 2-page paper. And don't forget about statistics.
No rest for the weary.
I don't sleep. I'm ready to go to bed.
Well, get your sleep. You got to have your beauty sleep, John.
All right. Hey, you have a good one.
All righty. See ya.
Bye.
Beth, are you still there? Hello, Beth.